As a teacher, have you ever caught your students doing something inappropriate? I teach at a Catholic middle school, so our standards for appropriate behavior are pretty high. Technically, a student telling another student to shut up counts as inappropriate for us, and I'd have to discipline that student if I heard it. The most inappropriate thing I've ever caught a student doing, that would be inappropriate even by public school standards, happened about 5 years ago. I was proctoring a standardized test near the end of the school year. All of the 8th graders had already been accepted into their high schools, and they just didn't care about the standardized test or anything else having to do with school at that point. This particular test session was an hour long, and students were not allowed to read a book or draw or do anything else once they were finished with their tests. The idea is to prevent students from rushing through the test to get back to a book they're reading. The 8th graders rushed through the test anyway, because they just didn't care. One student literally put his name on his paper and turned it in with all of the answers blank. He'd been a discipline problem for the 2 years I taught him, and I was happy he was about to move on to high school. He turned in his answer sheet before I even sat down from passing out everyone's tests, smiled at me, returned to his seat, and put his head on his desk. I wasn't allowed to say anything to him or encourage him to try harder or anything. He asked if he could sit in an unoccupied corner seat for the rest of the time, and I agreed. I was happy he was taking a nap and wasn't going to distract others. Or so I thought. About 15 minutes later, as I was walking around, monitoring everyone else who was still taking the test, I looked in his direction. His head was down and his hoodie was pulled over his head, but there was no mistaking what was going on. He was wearing sweatpants, and his hand was down them. He was playing with himself in the back of the classroom during a standardized test. I didn't want to make a scene, because I didn't want to disturb the students who were focused on the test. I had two options: tell him to stop, and risk him making a scene. Ignore it and tell his parents later. I went with option 2. After the test, I emailed the parents and CC'd my boss, explaining exactly what had happened with him not doing the test, and what he did afterwards. The mother apologized. My boss said I did the right thing. The kid didn't look me in the eyes for the next 3 weeks I taught him.